and it's going to be notes on questions of judging priority and authenticity, that is, among paintings. If you have two paintings, how do you judge which one is the earlier and the more likely to be from the real hand of the artist? And so on. It's a rather complicated matter, which I'll spend quite a bit of time on. Well, I'm going to use examples from the previous lectures, which are familiar to you somewhat, but saying more about them, but also bring in some others in the second half of this, which come from later periods, which illustrate my points better. I think these are extremely important matters, and this will kind of tie up the whole series in a way. A lot of it will be controversial in that not everybody agrees with this, but I think it's important nonetheless. Okay, we begin, first slides please, with the two details from the two versions of the Nymph of the Law River. The two divine figures, goddesses, floating up in the air. You will remember, if some of you will anyway, that when I discussed these, I pointed out the difference between the drawing of them and how in what I take to be the earlier version, the Liaoning version, on the left, the figures are drawn so that the volume of the figures and the space between them can be read, and the ribbons that flutter around them go around them and define their three-dimensionality and so on. You remember all that. Whereas in the Beijing version, the copyist, as I take it to be, flattens them, and the figures have no volume, and their ribbons don't work that way, and so on. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Next, please. Now, then I went on to talk about boats, as you remember. Again, the Liaoning version, which I take to be the earliest and best, is relatively readable. Features such as this kind of ladder-like thing built on the deck, which the boatmen push against as they pull the boat, or the way the ribbons in the upstairs hanging from the balcony, from the canopy, blow effectively and believably in the real one, and hang down straight and are misunderstood in the copy, in the Beijing version, which is on the right now. And then there was still a third version in the Freer Gallery, which all these, what seemed to me to be wrong matters, go further wrong. And I took it to be a copy of the Beijing version. So if that's true, then we have three versions, so three in chronological order. All right, that was relatively simple, if I'm right. Anyway, now then another pairing that I used in the lectures, less easy in this case, is the two pictures, two versions of the painting attributed probably by Li Song of the West Lake, in which the artist is able to blur and lighten parts of the painting to somehow reproduce the experience of seeing something through mist and at a distance quite beautifully. And then as you go back still further along the shore, you come to more houses, more trees, willow trees and so on. And then in the far distance, a walled city with a gate and with a great roof over it and roofs of houses inside. A city by the river in this ravine. And above it, again, a quite wonderful bluff with foliage. Here, now let's see. Yes, here's the next section, which you see this city. It's in some ways, I say, like the Li Sung West Lake picture, because the Academy artists were able to relax their hands without losing anything of their, as I said, representational skills, and able to map out, plot out, lay out the entire scene just faultlessly, just as you could, as if you're gazing at it and seeing things at different distances and looking different ways. And okay, next. Then beyond that, okay, that fades away, and for a while, as you roll the scroll, you're rolling blank paper, except for the beastly emperor who puts his great big seal right in the wrong place. Okay, forget that, if you can. Anyway, and just washes of ink for atmosphere, and then two boats, and then a third boat appear coming toward us. It's typical of hand scrolls that for dramatic effect we have boats and other travelers and so forth generally coming toward us as we roll. And then you see down below here the beginning of another section, just a little low shoreline, a bit of bamboo, a viewing pavilion, tingza, whatever, on the shore, and then the next section. And it is, here it is, a great cliff, a dramatic, vertical, massive form that comes in like a crash of timpani and brass in a symphony, breaking this slow, this quiet passage. And here you see the viewing tingza down here in the middle lower part among the bamboo, and this cliff done something like, I suppose you might say, the cliff in the painting we started with, the attribution by Wang Dao, the winter landscape. A massive form with enough texturing in the crucial places to bring out its rockiness, enough shading, dark to light, to bring out the shape of the form, vegetation on the top, and rocks, eroded rocks down below, as indeed is true in nature. Notice, by the way, there's still something of the old Li Tong kind of contour line drawing, if you see the contour of the cliff. There are innumerable copies of this, all the way to Sesshu in Japan, all with this great cliff coming in after a passage of a stretch of water. In the far lower left here, you see two figures making their way, two of our Gauscher figures out enjoying nature, making their way toward the viewing pavilion, the tingza, where they will sit and gaze at the scenery. Okay, let's go on now. Here is a detail of the cliff, showing just how effectively it is shaped and how the bottom of it is hollowed, as it might be by the erosion of water. And now we begin to have bits of, or drawing of water swirling around it. Throughout the whole middle passage, there wasn't much, if any, paint with indication of water, because we were gazing at it from a distance. And here you can see closer up the brushwork, which works very effectively, but is not brushwork for its own sake. There's nothing expressive about this. We're not, for God's sake, looking at the artist's personality. Yuck. That's all right. I'm being partisan here. Now here's the same scene a little bit further along, and here we can see better the two scholars arriving with their servant carrying a chin, which one of them will play as they sit in this tingza. And then, there's several more things going on than you think at first. Up in the top, upper right, through the foliage, and I'll have a detail in a minute, you can see the roofs of a temple again. So there's a Buddhist temple up there, accessible in some way, probably, okay. And then you can see a path with a railing leading upward in the sort of middle, slightly left of middle. And then, as I'll show in a detail in just a bit, there's a cave with two people seated in it. Two more people have come out to enjoy nature, and they have climbed to this cave, and they're sitting there simply talking quietly and enjoying their scenery. Well, the combination of this enormously powerful composition, the masses, these rocky masses, and the spaces, and the atmosphere, and everything, is just, I think, overwhelming. It's never been done as well again. Next, please. For just endless copies of this. Here's the upper part with the temple seen through the seen among the leafy trees. The next, please. Yeah, and here's the passage with the figures. The two of them, you see them in this little bit upper right, in a cave, seated on rocks, one of them something under his arm. These figures like these, facing each other, we saw them in a Ma Yuan painting in Boston. We could see them eventually in Sesshu paintings. Sesshu loved them. This pair of figures is endlessly repeated in imitations and so on. And here you can see up close the wonderful texturing of the rock and the railing of the pathway, of the path leading along the cliff down below. Well, how to put it? This texture, in the old sense of as it was done by Li Tong and before him by Swan Quan and so on, is radically reduced, not disappearing, but reduced, but is a brilliant use of tonal values for all the effects of distance and space and so on. The rocks are not so elegant as Ma Yuan's. The trees are more loose and free. And much of the painting is dramatic, but much of the rest of it is quiet, truly remote, profound. My lyric journey theme, I think, is exemplified here. At least I argue that way. And I describe it as we go. That is, people start out at the beginning now lost in their village, wherever they're living. And then they make their way, well, they stop at the temple and visit there. They move in boats. They stop at a little viewing pavilion under the great cliff, etc.